G'day ladies and gentlemen, how y'all doing? Scotty49 here with you once again for another video in our competitive focus series here on the channel. And in today's video, we are going to be looking at the October Balance Dataslate and discussing the changes that have been implemented and get my thoughts on it in a bit of a live react style of way, as we're going to be watching the Metawatch video for this one. But ladies and gentlemen, before we jump in any further, I want to thank everyone that has joined us over here on the channel as of late here on YouTube. It's really greatly appreciated, and I hope that you guys are enjoying the content. But ladies and gentlemen, let's see what this October Metawatch article and video has in store for us. Let's check it out. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, so as I've said, we're looking at the Metawatch article that includes the Balance Dataslate today for the competitive focus video, and I've got some notes that I'm going to be referring to throughout the video to talk about the points that Stu and Nick discuss in the video as we watch, and kind of give a bit of a live reaction to as we hear what they have to say and what they've brought about in terms of the Balance Dataslate for October. So let's hear from them.
Welcome to Metawatch, Games Workshop's regular show where we take a look at the state of matched play in our games. And today we're heading back to the grimdark far future, as there's a brand new Balance Dataslate released for Warhammer 40,000 today. I'm joined by Stu Black from the studio, who's here to take us through the Balance Dataslate, what it means for Warhammer 40,000, and the state of matched play right now. Stu, how you doing, man? You all right? You good?
Yeah, very good, thanks, Nick.
Really good to have you here again.
Yeah,
So yeah, we've got a brand new Balance Dataslate. Exciting. For those who might not know, what is a Balance Dataslate, and how long have you guys been making them?
That's a really good question. So a Balance Dataslate is one of the tools that we use to help try and curate, particularly the match play environment, try and help everyone have the most fun they can have in a kind of fair, balanced gaming environment. So there's a couple of tools we use. We use the Balance Dataslate, which we'll talk a bit more about. We use the points review that we do every 6 months, often called the Munitorum Field Manual. And we also, of course, do new mission packs every 6 months as well. All three of those really have a big impact on the balance of the game.
So the Balance Dataslate looks at particular factions you think need a bit of work in the game at the moment. Maybe they are maybe not quite performing where they should be, or they may be overperforming at the moment in sort of tournaments and that sort of thing. How do you get the information about how to target the Balance Dataslates?
Yeah, that's a really good question again. So we talked a bit about it on the last show. One of the main metrics we track is the win rate of particular factions across games all over the world. So we pull a load of data in from different events globally, and then we look at, like I say, the win rate. So essentially, how many times does that army win as a proportion of the games that they play? There's loads of other statistics as well that people look at, and we look at those as well. There's things like tournaments in a winning position, particular kind of faction secondary scoring, what secondary objectives do people take, how often do they score, what's the victory point differential between different factions.
You look at loads of stuff.
We do.
It's not just my mate beat me with tyranids last week.
No, we try not to base it just on like who beat me in the studio recently. Otherwise, Space Marines would just be the best army all the time.
Fair play, man. Yeah.
So with this one, as you can see, they not only look at the faction's win rate at events. Sure, they pull data from all the tournaments and everything, but they do also look at how they're going overall at events, the faction secondaries that people are taking for them, and how well they're scoring those secondaries, as well as the victory point differential. So the difference between, say, a Tyranids versus a Blood Angels game, like what we just saw on the weekend at SoCal Open for the final round, like the difference in terms of scoring points there, which I think is really good for them to be able to show that and look at that kind of data as well, rather than looking at just going, oh, this faction's winning 60+% of the time or something like that. Now, of course, these items are very similar to what the stat check guys do look at on their show, with the win rate dashboard and the amount of data that they have available there as well that's been provided to them by the Best Coast Pairings team.
Looking at the Balance Dataslates come out today, the Tyranids are the first on the list that have received a bit of a change. Tell me about why you think we needed a change and what the change has been made.
Yeah, sure. So Tyranids are one of the factions that is overperforming at the moment. If you look at their win rate, they're sitting at around about 60. And what we're trying to target is to get every faction in between 45 and 55%. That's like the Goldilocks zone. We talked about that last time as well.
So, as they've said, they've talked about this Goldilocks zone with what they're trying to achieve being between a win rate of 45 to 55% for all the factions in the game. I think that's a great idea and a great goal to attain for. However, I think it's going to take a lot more time to achieve that, despite the data that they do show on the Metawatch article itself, which we'll actually go to. As you can see down below here, I'll just pull it up so it's above my head. You can see that harlequins and tyranids are above that 55% threshold at 58 for harlequins and 59 for tyranids. But then you've also got Adeptus Astartes being 39% and Adeptus Mechanicus also being 39%. So they're really struggling in terms of the metagame at the moment. And so I think initially trying to get everyone between 40 and 60 is what they should be aiming for as an initial goal. And I know the Stack Check guys, I was listening to them recently and they do agree that that's a bit more of an attainable goal. And if we do use that 40 to 60%, then we only see Adeptus Mechanicus and Adeptus Astartes being those factions that are not in that 40 to 60% win rate area. So I think if we get all the factions in there first, and then we work on getting them into that Goldilocks zone, I think it'll be a lot more attainable from there.
And so Tyranids are one of the factions that sticks out the top of that. And that's driven by a whole series of interactions within their book. So there's a couple of things that particularly make Tyranids work well. There's a bunch of really good synergies. So in this balanced data slate, we specifically look at two things, really. One of them is one of the sub-factions. So the Leviathan sub-faction is very popular. It's got a great ability that it gives loads of the units in that sub-faction. And one of the changes we've made to that is to make it mainly only affect monsters.
It's like transhuman physiology for Space Marines, isn't it? Where you can only be wounded on a 4, 5, or a 6.
Yeah.
And it used to apply to all Synapse creatures, but now only applies to monsters.
Yeah.
So basically, the warriors have lost it. Essentially.
Yeah, essentially that's right. So really, there are some other like small interactions, but essentially, it's Tyranid warriors no longer get that benefit. And Tyranid warriors are quite a key unit in most Tyranid builds. They're really tough, super tough if they're Leviathan. They're quite killy. They're really useful in loads of ways. So by doing kind of like a precision kind of poke at that particular interaction, we're just trying to take the edge off of those a little bit.
So as you can see, Stu's mentioning the fact that they've made a tweak to the Leviathan rule for the High Fleet Leviathan, so that they can only be wounded on an unmodified wound roll of a 4+ if they're a Synapse monster. Now, this does result in a little bit of a different change than what Stu mentions here, because Zoanthropes also do get hit by this change, but they're still T5 with a 4-up invulnerable save, still quite durable, whereas Warriors lose the most benefit here, still being T4 with no invulnerable save. Now, as we've been seeing in a lot of factions as of late, a lot of Tyranid armies, a lot of the faction is going towards that Leviathan build. And very early on in the Codex, where we're seeing a lot more warrior builds, whereas now we're seeing a lot more like Gargoyle and Termagant, Hormagaunt style builds with minimal warriors. So maybe that's something that might have been in the lead up to the balanced data slate, or that's something that just is trending across the meta at the moment. Now, I would have maybe liked to have seen if it would have been a bit different. Say they had have done something where instead of doing they just don't get the ability at all, maybe they, whilst within Synapse range of another creature, they get the lower version of that. So maybe an unmodified to wound roll of a 1 or a 2 always fails against them. Maybe that'll be the change, that if this is a bit too big of a swing for the Warriors, that they implement that. I don't know. But yeah, I know a lot of people have been quite confused. Even myself initially was confused on this, but no, they do not get the benefit of even the mini transhuman of being unable to be wounded on a 1 or a 2. They're flat out able to be wounded on 2s now in general, so quite a big change for both Zoanthropes and Warriors here.
But what we don't want to do is affect Tyranid warriors everywhere.
Yep.
So this is a good example of us trying to do like a precision strike on a particular sub-faction that's driving an overall faction performance.
Which, as I've already said, we do touch on that. And we've seen this idea across Harlequins and other factions in the game and other sub-factions as well. For a particular example, some of the Drakari sub-factions as well, with the Thick City lists way back when they got quite popular. They got hit with a nerf as well in a very similar fashion. So this means that they're going to be able to show that, yes, this particular sub-faction is overperforming. We're going to bring it down a little bit. And maybe we'll start to see some of the other sub-factions start to become a bit more popular as well, rather than one sub-faction really propping up that win rate and really performing quite well for the army. So we're just going to kind of skip the next little bit, because they just go through a bunch of general thoughts about balancing things and the different layers that they look at attacking, different balancing tweaks, whether it's the faction level, the sub-faction level, or the data sheet level, or the points level as well they do use. So we're going to skip straight ahead to about 7 minutes in here, and I'll just find it real quick. So about there.
You've made a change to Leviathan to help out what you're talking about there, but you've also changed one of the relics, the Reaper of Obliterax. Now, you've made that so that it could have done multiple mortal wounds, but you've capped it at 3. Why have you made that change?
Yeah, so it's a quality of life thing, really. So it's essentially a magical bone sword that the Hive Tyrants can use, and when they do damage, they also do additional mortal wounds. And we were just finding it was putting out just too much damage output. The Hive Tyrant itself is clearly like a really powerful monster, particularly when it's a flying one, so it's super mobile, it's really tough, it's hard to kill, and it's really killy. And we were just seeing that relic was picked an awful lot over some of the others, so we've just kind of taken the edge off it a little bit by capping it at 3 mortal wounds. It's still a great pick, but it's maybe a little bit less of an auto take.
It was one of those auto takes you were talking about before. Now
sure.
you've got a bit of a choice between the other relics in the list as well. That's fair enough, man.
So, again, they've said that they've changed the Reaper of Obliterax, capping the mortal wounds that it can do to a maximum of 3 mortal wounds. Now, this does mean that it still ignores rules that allow you to ignore wounds from it, as well as ignoring damage caps. But still, like, limiting it to 3 mortal wounds per damage still means if you get all of the damage through, you're going to be able to do a hell of a lot in general. I still think it's going to be seen as an auto take. You know, the 2 relics that we're seeing the most in competitive Leviathan lists at the moment are the Shard Gullet and the Reaper of Obliterax. They've tweaked the Reaper. I'm not 100% certain why they maybe haven't touched the Shard Gullet. Maybe because it is a shooting weapon. It does rely on the to-hit roll to be able to do so well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here, whether we start to see the Reaper maybe not taken as often, and maybe the Shard Gullet starts to be taken a bit more often, or whether both are still taken just as often, because the Reaper is still, whilst yes, capped to 3 mortal wounds, doing 3 mortal wounds is still enough. For example, for a Marine, if you only get one Marine down to 1 wound, for example, and you hit the 3 mortal wounds, well, you're killing that Marine and another Marine as well. So it's really important to kind of figure out whether the mortal wound capping is going to be important. We're starting to see a lot of mortal wound capping across the codexes now, whether it's a cap of 3 in this instance, or we're seeing caps of 6 with a lot of psychic powers and other things there as well.
And it's worth saying with the Tyranids, so we've made a series of interventions in previous balance data slates, and it feels like we're kind of getting to a place where we don't want to go too far. So we don't want to make big sweeping changes to the Tyranids at this stage. As we spoke about earlier, we have some other balance tools as well. So in January there'll be a new field manual, so we'll review all of the points for every model in 40k, which is a fun job.
And quite possibly secondaries
but at this
as well.
stage we think just making some quite subtle changes to Tyranids should just tone them down enough, and also give some of those other sub-factions within the Tyranid Codex like a little bit of breathing space.
Fair play, man.
So yeah, as Stu was saying, you know, hopefully we'll be able to see a lot more diversity in terms of the Tyranid sub-factions. In Australia, locally here in Canberra, we do have a couple of really good Tyranid players. Some of them do prefer playing Kraken. So hopefully they will transition back from Leviathan to Kraken. And even some of the New South Wales players, Mr. Ben Way, one of the more organizer level people within the community, but he does play competitively as well, has taken Jormungandr in previous events as well, and gone alright with them, so maybe we'll start to see some different builds coming out of the Tyranid sub-factions as a result of this Leviathan change.
Up next, we've got the Harlequins. Now, they've been winning tournaments all over the place.
They have.
That for build of all the vehicles flying all over the place. You've made a bit of a change to the Blaze of Light characterization. What have you changed, and how do you expect that's going to change the meta?
Yeah, again, another example of quite a subtle change. So the Blaze of Light Sadeth effectively means that you can count as being stationary even if you've moved, which interacts quite a lot with different weapon abilities, things like assault weapons, heavy weapons, or just actually the ability to actually shoot if you've advanced. So what you have is you have a fast-moving army anyway. So the harlequins are super fast. They're nearly always mounted up in their transports. And what the rule currently enables them to do is fly those transports right across the board to wherever they need to get to, and then attack things with their missile weapons, and put quite a lot of damage out. And what this does is just, tone that down a little bit, because it's made it so that it doesn't count if you're in a transport. So you're still super fast, you can still do those things, but you can't count as stationary. So if you advance with that transport, you can't fire some of the weapons, or you might actually have to get out of your transport.
Heaven forbid.
And that's a big deal for harlequins.
Yeah,
Harlequins don't do very well in the open. They're full of tricks. They're quite hard to pin down. But actually, if you can catch one of them, they're pretty squishy. So what this enables us to do again is just kind of like trim the edges off of that harlequin performance.
That's a really good change. I like that a lot. It's going to make harlequin players maybe think exactly about what they put in the transports a bit more.
Yeah, and again, like
So again, another good change in my opinion. Harlequins are sitting at that 58% win rate, as we'd previously mentioned earlier in the video, and I think they're 100% correct. Harlequins are a super fast faction. They're able to get up in your face quickly, turn 1, turn 2, depending on the deployment, able to do a lot of damage, particularly being able to remain stationary in the light Sadeth whilst remaining in vehicles for that little bit of extra protection for the players as well. So making this change to not affect units within transports. So it means that yes, you can still move, advance, and count as remaining stationary if you're on foot or if you're not a transport vehicle. But units within transport, so player troops or other characters you might put a Death Jester or a a Shadow Seer within a transport to do stuff. Really important that they no longer count as remaining stationary. So as Nick was saying, makes you think a bit twice about what units you are putting in, how you're going to play. Sure, you're going to still be super fast, and there's nothing wrong with being able to move up, advance, and then maybe you're not shooting as well, or a lot of things there. I think that's a great change, still being able to be affected by the advance and -1 for assault weapons, can't fire heavy weapons. I think that's a good change overall, and maybe we'll see that pull down the Harlequins maybe a couple of percent, dip back down into like 55%, maybe 54. We'll just see what happens after events start adopting the rules changes here in the October Balance Dataslate. So not much else that they add on here. So we're going to skip forward again. We're going to jump forward to where they start talking about the next faction that they have made a change for. And we'll just let it buffer. There we go.
In match play.
So up next, we've got the mighty Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, and you've made a bit of a change to the Shock Assault secondary objective from the Nephilim book. Now you gain a bit more victory points than you did before. Why that change? That seems quite a small change, but one of those laser-focused ones you were talking about.
Yeah, so again, when we were talking last time, we were talking about trying to affect the factions that are sitting at the top, outside that Goldilocks zone, and also, probably more importantly, the ones that sit near the bottom. So factions that are underperforming. So that effect, if you think about what that player experience is like, you're going in to play a game kind of feeling like you're on the back foot.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is make it...
Even as a Marine player, I feel like that.
I've got a fair shot at this. So Space Marines are under where we want them to be in their win rates. We talked a little bit last time about some of the reasons for that. But this is quite a simple change that just means you just score more points for doing what you did last week.
Great.
So you do exactly what you did in your last game, you'll just score some bonus points along the way. So it's quite a simple change that just means you score more victory points, and at the end of the day, that's how you win games.
See,
all right. As a Marine player, and if you're fellow Marine players, I'd love to hear about this down in the comment section, actually. I actually hardly think that this changing the shock tactic secondary from 3 victory points to 4 victory points, isn't going to help Marines, in my opinion, whatsoever. There is actually too much predicated in this objective for killing a unit off the objective and then having a unit actually remain on it and control it to score it. If they really wanted to improve this secondary for the Space Marines, there's a few other ways that they can do it, such as doing things like, okay, maybe you've just got to be on the objective and having killed your opponent or killed an enemy unit but not controlling it. Or maybe they could have changed it in such a way, kept it at 3 victory points, and done it to where they're then like, okay, for each objective that you do this on to a maximum of 3 per turn, you can actually get 9 points or 3 points per objective that you actually achieve this on. So I think limiting it to 1 or more for only 4 victory points. Kind of sucks. You could have also seen a table where it's like, okay, which they're not afraid to do, by the way. They're not afraid to give you scoring tables. So maybe if it's like, okay, for 1 objective you get 3, for 2 objectives you get 5, and maybe for 3 objectives you get 7, for example. And that really means that you've then got to be able to score it decently. But increasing it by 1 victory point in general, just so you're getting more points for this secondary, to be honest, for me, that ain't it, Chief. There's a lot of better ways you could have achieved this for Space Marines, and there's very few factions that benefit from this. So, yeah, not a big fan of that. A lot of Space Marine players I've talked to as well aren't fans of this change either. It does nothing for us, in our opinion, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are as well. Once again, we are going to skip forward to the next faction as well to keep this ball rolling so it's not too long of a video for you guys. So we're going to hear them talking about the next faction that they've made changes for.
Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, you talked in the last Metawatch episode about the fact that you think you might have changed them a bit too much in previous data slates. This time we've seen a quite big change for them, but perhaps the other way. What's happened here, and how have you made that decision?
Yeah, so that's a great one, because it's kind of what's new for them in the Balance Data Slate. Nothing. We've taken it away. It's like, so the Adeptus Mechanicus were doing very well in previous mission packs and in a previous meta. So the game was quite different a year ago to what it is now. And actually, Adeptus Mechanicus were doing super well in that time. So we used the Balance Data Slate to just put some pressure on them, kind of push them down slightly, so that they were
super
more fun
oppressive
to play against and had kind of a less oppressive win rate.
Yeah, they were
the game's
really
changed.
oppressive back
then. We've got new missions, we've got different factions in play. So actually, we've been tracking the Adeptus Mechanicus win rate, and it has been dropping. It's below where we want it to be. So the simplest interaction for us to do is to just take those things away.
So, considering that their win rate has only slightly improved from what I've seen since the previous data slate, removing all their limitations that they once had in place, I think is the right change for them to bring them back up. In my opinion, Stu's going to explain a bit more as to why in a second here.
So, the change for the Balance Data Slate for the Adeptus Mechanicus is they're not in it anymore. They're essentially using the rules in their book again.
Which is great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously for players who there's less things to pay attention to, and that's just not codex, which is cool.
Yeah.
One of the things we talked about before was that the enriched rounds stratagem is an interesting change, because previously it had been sort of changed so that it was wounding on 5s to hit rather than 4s, as the codex says, and you made it 2 command points. But now you've made it as it is in the book, so it's 4s to hit is a wound and 1 command point. There's less command points in the game you mentioned.
Yeah.
So that's going to be really good for them. And also we've got the Leagues of Votan and their judgment tokens. The whole army doing 4 to hit is 4 to win. So in the enriched rounds feels like a nice change for them.
Yeah, and that's a really good example. You mentioned the command points. So a great example of how the game state's changed around the factions is, in previous mission packs, people had a lot more command points. So your relative cost of a stratagem, if you're like, actually, this is a 2 command point stratagem and I've got 10 command points, well, it's a fifth of my resource. If I've only got 4, it's half my resource. So you haven't changed the cost of the thing, you've just changed the economy around it, and then that has a knock-on into the game.
Which is a really big thing, and I like what Stu's actually said there, because if you only take a Relic and Warlord trait currently in Nephilim at a 2,000 point game starting with 6 CP, you're down to that 4 CP. So it's a really great point to point that out, as well as also being like, well, Votan actually have their judgment tokens doing the exact same thing for an army-wide special rule, so why are we hindering a faction that has it on a stratagem for 2 CP and 5s to hit when these guys can pile on 3 tokens really easily and get auto wounding on 4s? I think this is a great change. But also, starting with a third less CP, I hope that they do change in the next mission pack. I hope they go back to, okay, you do still start with 6 CP, because I like that change, don't get me wrong, but you get your Warlord trait and Relic for free. That's what I really hope they go back and kind of trickle back on a little bit with here. So then we're about to jump into the last faction that they do have some changes for in the Balanced Data Slate this time around.
One last one we've got here as well is the necrons. They've received a small but important change here. You've taken a word away from some vehicles. You've taken the core keyword away from the character vehicles.
Yeah.
Why that change?
So this one, to be honest, isn't really about balance. This is more about we made a change in the balance data slate to put core on a load of things to help necrons. And one of the things it's led to is kind of an interaction that I think lots of players find slightly confusing. So the Silent King effectively gained the core keyword because he's a vehicle, and then there's things that you could do. You can bring back their menhirs, and I think lots of players on both sides of the table found that slightly kind of what's the word, like unintuitive, and they're like, can I really, is this okay? Like, this doesn't feel like it's right, and it's not that it's super powerful or you know, game breaking. It just felt like, actually, if it's slightly confusing for people, we should change it. So this one's more of a
I like that
quality of life
attitude
improvement than us being particularly worried about necrons. The necron win rate is sitting near the top of the bracket, but it is in the safe zone. So we're not making that change to, you know, nerf necrons. We're just trying to tidy that up and make that interaction feel more like the players think it should work.
Is it one of those intentions?
So again, this change is pretty much taking away the core keyword from any characters that have also got the vehicle keyword. I think it's a great change. As Stu has said, it's more of a quality of life update, an update change, rather than it being like problematic and then them being like, oh, this is a problem, we need to fix it. No, it's just a quality of life thing. It's just clearing up an interaction that'll, you know, as he said, both players across the side of the table, and as I interjected, saying that tournament organizers also had the same problem because they'd get asked this question, they'd have to rule on it, right? Some events ruled one way, saying no, others said yes, that interaction's fine. So it's really good that they've actually cleared it up in this balanced data slate. And it's honestly the one change that I thought they would make to necrons in this balanced data slate months ago. And it'll clear up this tricky rules interaction and make the lives of both the player who are playing necrons, the player who's playing against necrons, and tournament organizers and event organizers' lives so much better because of it.
He talks about where, like, the rules designers never really intended those interactions to work, or is it more that you've seen it in action and now you thought maybe we shouldn't bring that back?
Yeah, so I think it works fine. Like, there's not a problem with it from a rules mechanic point of view. Mechanically, it works fine. I think players have just kind of bounced off it a little bit and found it a little bit like, oh, am I cheating? Because it feels a bit like this shouldn't work like this. Not just their opponent, you know, Necron players themselves. So there's a few things with Necrons. Like I say, Necrons are kind of sitting near the top of their win bracket at the moment. So they are on our watch list. I think they are really good at scoring objectives at the moment. Their faction secondaries themselves are really good. And we're just keeping an eye on that at the moment. We don't think...
So pretty much they continue to discuss a few other things, but they're keeping an eye on Necrons and Adeptus Sororitas as well, because they are around that 54-55%, potentially bouncing out of that. And they say that, you know, if harlequins and tyranids drop, there might be a little bit of room for sisters and necrons to jump back up, and then there'll be a bit of a balance change there as well. But that really covers it for everything I kind of want to discuss in this video. Once again, we're going to go through those changes kind of in the straightforwardness of them that they've got at the bottom of the article, where it pretty much says, so they changed the first bullet point of Hive Fleet Leviathan for the Tyranids to each time an attack is made against a Synapse monster unit with this adaptation, an unmodified to wound roll of a 1 to 3 always fails, irrespective of any abilities that the weapon or the attacker may have. They amend the first bullet point of the Reaper of Obliterax to each time an attack is made with this weapon, if the attack successfully wounds the target suffers 1 mortal wound in addition to any other damage to a maximum of 3 mortal wounds. They change Harlequins, which is the second bullet point of the Blaze of Light, which is a light Sadeth characterization, to the following. Each time a unit with this characterization makes a normal move or advances in your movement phase, in your following shooting phase, that unit counts as having remained stationary. This does not apply if a unit is embarked in a transport. The Adeptus Astartes change has changed the shock tactics secondary in the Nephilim Grand Tournament mission pack to read, at the end of your turn, score 4 victory points if you control 1 or more objective markers that were controlled by your opponent at the start of your turn, and an Adeptus Astartes unit from your army is within range of that objective marker. The Adeptus Mechanicus change is all changes to the Adeptus Mechanicus from the previous balanced starter slates have been removed, and for the Necrons, the core keyword is not added to Necron vehicles data sheets that have the character keyword. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be my reaction to the video from the Metawatch guys talking about the October Balance Dataslate. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, well, I hope that you did enjoy this kind of react style content to what they were saying. If you have any of your own comments or any of your own thoughts, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And if you did want to see more of this style competitive focused content where we talk about the mission updates, we talk about factions, all that kind of stuff, let me know in the comments. Make sure to drop a like on the video. And if you do want to see more of my content in general, whether it's competitive focused stuff, for the new guys series or tournament coverage and battle reports, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn that notification bell on so you know when videos are released here on the channel. But if you do want to have a bit more of an open discussion, feel free to come and find me where I'm live over on Twitch on Tuesday and Fridays, where we do hobby sessions, we do live games from time to time as well, and I travel to tournaments right across the Australian Southeast, covering them for your viewing pleasure. And you can ask me there in chat whilst we're hobbying away or looking at some games. But ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.